Hello, I'm Zach Thompson, and this is a visual demonstration of my project, a narrative exploration game called As the Sun Dies. To start off, this is the main menu level. I'll show it off really quickly here. This effect was created by cloning the main level and removing everything not on the screen, such as the motel, for optimization purposes. I then created a main menu game mode and set the default pawn class to none, forcing the player to inherit the camera. The logo here was made by myself, and both buttons are self-explanatory. Immediately, the player begins outside of their car, just when this loads. Any attempt to access the road is met by a speeding truck here. This just provides a narrative reason why the player can't just walk on the road, and escape the map. Moving on to the reception room up here, you'll notice a bit of voice acting recorded and edited by myself using Audacity. The reception itself is a familiar scene, being the main menu of course. Here the player is greeted to no one, with a short voice line prompting the player to check the rooms for someone to speak to. The voice lines are set up as actors, so when the player enters a collision box, I can show it off here. Yeah, they enter a collision box, which causes this string to play, which deletes the actor upon the sound finishing. Let's go back to the game. This stops voice lines duplicating over themselves if you were to walk into it a couple of times. You'll notice certain items in this room, such as the laundry machine, the coffee pot, the fan, have been included to add a sense of realism into the level. This is the case in every room, even down to light switches, plug sockets, moved furniture, and the number of cars. The next room is rented by the Mexican cartel to sell drugs and firearms. Care has been taken with the placement of items, such as these guns, to avoid clipping. The next room is inhabited by a family who was smuggled across the border by the same people who rent the room next door. This is part of the interlinking stories within the El Sol Motel. Each room's guest has a story linking them to another, sometimes multiple guests. Room number 3 here is home to two detectives on a stakeout, watching and gathering intel on Room 1's seedy inhabitants. This is one of the first rooms I created, and thus was used to show off my ability to set dress in a way that tells a story, such as the empty coffee cups by the bin from late night stalks, or the furniture moved around to make room for the recording equipment. There is also an audio log here, which is just banter between the two detectives and hinting at a story told in the two rooms on the upper floor.
Total 13 activities, 2 visits. Detective George is taking the night watch. Detective Hartley signing out. Signing out? Taking this shit more seriously than I have.
There is a slight UI glitch here where the press F to listen just fails to leave the screen, but that's something which is very temperamental within the build itself.
Alright.
I'll mention I'm playing in the editor because I had trouble actually building the game. Some UI elements just failed to show up, and this lets me switch quickly between the level and the blueprints. The two rooms upstairs detail the tragedy of a couple who've fallen out with each other and have run away, but by some cruel twist of fate have unknowingly ended up in adjacent rooms to one another. The Room 4 guest Ernest is a very tragic character, as discovered in the various notes around his room. He's been diagnosed with cancer and recently lost his daughter, leading him to become alcoholic with all of the bottles in the room, and also suicidal, which evident in the suicide note that he has prepared, and also the gun that he keeps under his pillow. To get this sort of information to the player, I created an item inspection system. This system uses an actor, which is found by the player via a line trace seen as this red dot within the editor, where they look at an item which prompts a UI, which when pressed attaches said item to the player's capsule, and then when pressed again brings the item to the front of the player. This disables input, so you're stood still. You can rotate the item by clicking and dragging or zooming in by using the wheel. On the right there is a short description box, which either contains information about the item directly or the character's thoughts during the moment. Items are created using the item parent, which sets the visibility of the item name and item description, which can be edited individually. So here I've created a child blueprint. Let's call this fish. I can go into fish, I can change the item name, the item description, the static mesh, and that all feeds back into the HUD on the right there. So it's a dynamic system. This also works for physical notes, where on the right there, instead of item description, it is just the text for those who may struggle to read the actual physical item itself. Objects are physics based and can be moved around by the player, such as this note here, which leads to situations where you can put grenades or pictures of loved ones or this bear spray into the bins located in each room. Room 5 here is the room of the heartbroken woman, Juliet. Evidence here suggests she works for the police who are conducting the stakeout downstairs. They actually mention her by name, as well as her being Ernest's wife, the guy from room 4 next door, which is evidenced by the letters being signed by each partner respectively. There is also a warning fax sent by someone called Quentin Liu, who is part of the cult within the motel, detailing that Ernest and Juliet's daughter was killed by the cult, hence she is investigating them. The final room, room 6, is locked, requiring a keycard to open. This works in tandem with the inspection system, with some doors requiring the player to have a specific key in order to trigger the opening animation of the door. So this can be set to any item that you can pick up and interact with. This just means I can place a room 6 keycard in the level itself, and the player has to carry it themselves to room 6 in order to open it. The keycard is spawned upon the level start, so in theory if you already knew that you needed the keycard, you could bring it straight away and just skip all of the rooms. In this room there is a very grisly scene of a human sacrifice alongside some religious text here, as well as a list of names which are presumably victims of the cult. The lighting in this room, so the candles and the chandelier, are sort of to create this sort of tense, disturbing atmosphere, whereas the coffee and the wine sort of reflect the normality and mundaneness of the act to the cultists running the motel. Taking this key to the hatch outside is required to get the player underground to where the game's ending, or one of the game's endings, take place. It's hoped with leaving this gate open, the players would naturally sort of gravitate to this hatch at some point during gameplay, or upon getting the hatch key, they'd sort of look out over the balcony, sort of looking for a hatch. They open it, and you greet with a cave. I've created a mechanic to slow the player's movement down here to build intensity, stop them from rushing to the reveal. Inside the cave there's the remaining bodies and the button. This is where the game's two endings kick in. The player can either press the button, unveiling the monster, as I'm going to do now, or there is ending 2, and it just cuts off here. Let me quickly load up the level again and just speed the process up. Ending 2 involves the player simply finding the button, deciding this isn't really what they want their character to do, and turning around and going back to their car. I would have quite liked to have sort of an ending cutscene for both endings to differentiate them, because currently they both just cut out to the quick game node. But this is for future consideration. I also would have liked separate interaction icons for the physical notes, so they sort of played as a UI element rather than being interactable, and also an inventory system where the player could sort of keep their items that they picked up in their inventory and go back to them rather than having to go back to the room where they potentially lost an item, because it's quite easy for them to sort of clip into walls. But with an inventory system you could go into your inventory through a pause menu and look at the items and have a description, the name of the item, where it was found. But that's all for future consideration.